All right.
The last time I think it's probably but close enough for
Testing 1, 2, 3, 4.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's 9 o'clock. Welcome to the June meeting of the Election Integrity Commission. If you're able to, please rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to be led by Mary Preble.
Please join me in the pledge to our great flag, the United States of America. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mary. And for those of you that haven't heard, this is Mary's last meeting. She will be replaced by an as yet unknown individual to be appointed by the Republican County Party Chair. Roll call, Misty Atkins.
Present.
Connie DeLarge.
Present.
Ryan Mace.
Present.
Lavoy Hurley.
Present.
Barbara Tillman.
Here.
Penny White.
Here.
Arthur Kirshen.
Here.
Mary Preble.
Present.
And the chair is here. Call to the public. Is there anybody here that would like to address the commission? Seeing none, we'll move on to the next agenda item. Update on elections. Jesus, is Mr. Rassi going to be joining us this morning?
Mr. Rassi will not be joining us.
Okay.
He had nothing to report, so the email he sent out last month is the same information. I can resend that to the board if they like.
Okay, thank you. Election demonstration. Ms. Hargrove, this is... Yes, sir.
Jesus, please ask Mr. Racy to give us an update specifically on Senate Bill 2780, the current status of that bill and the probability that it will be considered for passage. Thank you.
Will do. Thank you.
Okay, anything else as far as election bills are concerned?
Mr. Chairman,
Mr. Hurley, Commissioner Hurley?
I got a note here. I'm told that the streaming link is not working.
Mic's on. Mic's on.
Mic's on. I'm told that the streaming link is not working. Is that correct?
Not anymore.
Is it going to be working?
It's working.
Okay, thank you.
What they see is what's up on the screen.
All right, I'm just responding to a text I just received a minute ago. Thank you.
Okay. Ms. Hargrove, election demonstration.
Yes, Dave Wisely will come up and present the demonstration.
Basically, what we did before the meeting started was we plugged in the cradle point and the printer And so when the poll workers start their day, they will turn on the e-poll books. This is the exciting part. Yeah. They will then be required to log in. And then enter a couple of passwords. And then we can test the printer. These are 14-inch ballots. Oh, you can go ahead and hand that to them. At that point, they're ready to go. So if anyone has their driver's license, we can pull you up. Let's see who's first. And so all they would have to do is say, we're scanning a driver's license. There's a spot back here where you, and let's see. That looks like it's you. On the license, I can give that back to you. We would say, yes, continue. And you're eligible to vote, so I get your ballot. It flips, so the poll worker check this out, but when I give it to you, you can sign, and you can grab a stylus, of course, and then when you're ready, you hit done. I can now say issue ballot.
It verifies against his voter badge.
Correct. So now, you've still got your license?
We're only going to do one.
Correct.
Let me see if it'll do a military ID.
It will not.
It will not.
It will not do a military ID. It can, sorry, I should be here. It cannot do the military ID, but it can do your driver's license or your voter ID card.
So it only looks at barcodes, not this, not.
Well, no, it looks at the QR code on the driver's license, and it can look at a barcode on the voter ID card. So this should now, if I try scanning you again. I don't have it set up yet for exactly. So my demo is at that point. Let me see if they're, I didn't check to see if they were sideways communicating. Oh, I had not completed the check-in process. Because after you print that, you go to your next voter in line. And it hadn't printed the ballot yet, had it?
No.
Oh, okay.
So just to clarify, at this point in the process, I've walked up to the poll worker, I've shown him my ID, you've checked me in, now you're printing my ballot. I'm voting
Correct.
my ballot. I'm turning this in, and we're going to see a demonstration of me trying to check in for a second time, right? I just want to make sure the audience is with us on this. Okay, excellent. I wouldn't vote for any of these people. There we go.
I am not getting something I need. It may be because they're a little low, but we can try it anyway.
So you want to hand me one as well, David, so that you...
Oh, yes, sorry. It should say it's communicating sideways, but I don't see it at the moment, so. Oh, this is the one you
Well,
voted on. But here, we can try someone else, or I can we can try someone else, or I can try demonstrating how you would manually look up a voter.
okay. Here you go. Jesus, how many e-poll books do we currently have in Pima County?
We have 400.
And how many printers?
We have one tester right there, and we're expecting the shipment to get here this month.
So sometime between now and the 4th of July.
Yes.
Okay.
I'm sorry, what was the question?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
How many printers do we have?
Oh, just one now, but I did verify with the vendor on yesterday, and he assured me via email and writing that June 29th is the date that we will get all of the printers.
Right. Oh, sorry.
Mr. Chairman,
260 printers.
Commissioner Hurley.
Ms. Hargrove, you're going to get 260 printers at the same time?
Probably 2 truckloads.
How long is it going to take you to go through those 200 plus, almost 300 printers, not just inventory them, but run them through all their diagnostics, all their checkouts, do all the integration with the networks and the printers and the e-poll books, and verify that everything on every single one of those configurations is working? How long do you think it's going to take you to do that?
So I would say it takes us probably about 30 minutes to set up one vote center with the printer and the poll books and the cradle points and sync everything together and do a test. So we multiply that times the 260 printers.
And how extensive is that test? Are you going through a full diagnostic of the equipment to make sure everything is, printers have diagnostics, in other words, you run all that kind of stuff?
What was the acceptance testing part of that, Mr. Wisely, for the printers? Was there any acceptance testing?
Yes, we made sure, basically what we're going to do is sync it with all of the equipment and make sure we can print from it. And the vendor is also doing a performance test, but we will do a somewhat abbreviated test because of the time, but we will make sure it can communicate effectively, functionally print, and then a few more steps.
Now, these are the new printers, the replacements for the Lexmark, is that correct? The ones that we couldn't get anymore?
Correct.
So how much experience do they have with these printers on these systems?
Limited. But we've been testing the one we've had for about, I think, 2 weeks now, and it's performing very well. I mean, we're in the situation we're in.
That's what worries me.
These are new printers, but they're a trusted company, And so far, they have been performing very well.
One last question.
I do have some stress tests I'm going to put this
Okay.
one through, but I didn't want to do it before today's
All right.
demonstration.
One last question. You said you're going to go through all the configurations. Are you going to, once you test them in a configuration, does that unit, that setup, that printer, that iPad, everything, get packaged into a unit? And
Correct.
then shipped out as a unit that's already been tested together, right?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Does anyone want to see the manual search or anything else?
I'm assuming the manual search is for somebody that doesn't have a barcode readable ID,
Correct.
either a driver's license or a voter identification card.
Correct.
Yeah, how
Okay.
does that work?
Does it show on the camera or no? Okay. So, basically, you would have somebody's ID, so you would know their name, first and last name, or birth date or something. So, the screen has a list of IDs that they did present. So I'm just going to say utility bill. That. And then anyone?
7201 East River Canyon Way.
Oh, okay. I can do it by address. 7201.
Yes, East. 3 words, River Canyon Way.
Will it accept an approximate spelling, or would it have to be exact?
So all I did was put E River C and it found that address. Let me continue. And that is to be you. So I would continue. You're an eligible voter. And what you would also do at this time, and not just sign, but you would verify that your information is correct. Correct.
You're asking me to sign a real budget, not the
And
scribble.
the stylus that I should have brought is much better than, yeah.
What about the situation where 2 IDs are needed?
Oh, and that would be it. Unfortunately, Arizona is unique in requiring in certain of their ID standards. So at this point in time, we don't have them where we indicate both acceptable forms of IDs that they have to have on. If they provide one, we're indicating that, but we're not showing that they provided these 2 forms, just that they did provide acceptable ID.
But the person operating the system will know she has to ask for, he or she
Correct.
has to ask for a second?
Correct.
How do we know that?
Well, because we didn't track the ID, the form of ID they used before. We simply said, we have one-sheet forms that go with the poll workers, and we used to have them in the check-in station, and it said, this is the acceptable forms of ID for, that contain government-issued ID with picture and matching address. If they don't have that, if they have their driver's license, but it's a different address because they haven't updated it, they would then have to provide a second. So there's a list of those second. But we didn't record that on anything because we didn't have to.
So that has to be done manually, it's not done by the computer?
Correct. Your ID check, even if I took somebody's driver's license and scanned it, I am still required to say, that is you. I have to verify that that is an acceptable ID for you.
No, I'm asking if a person comes in with the utility bill and an insurance card, you record that, or note that somewhere that they
No.
provided 2 forms of ID?
No.
We didn't before.
Yeah, but somebody has to You are checking that, in other words.
They do have to check it, they just don't record.
Okay,
And this is a step up. We will eventually get them
okay.
to where we can record everything, but that was not something we were able to track before.
I know in the past you said this significantly reduces the number of provisional ballots, but will not eliminate provisional ballots. Under what circumstances would we still expect that a poll worker would have to refer someone for a provisional ballot?
So
And how does that work with the e-poll book?
So let's say that the only ID they brought was a driver's license with their old address. And they're saying, oh, no, their voter registration shows their current address. Those don't match. And since they don't match, that's not complete ID. So in that case, they would need to vote provisionally to make sure that even though that it has to complete that check. Another would be a conditional provisional is if they have no identification. So then not only do they have to vote a provisional ballot, but it's conditional on the fact that they then have to go to Pima County Recorder's office with acceptable ID and say, I did vote there and this is who I am.
But is that something that's tracked through the e-poll book, or is that strictly a
Correct.
manual process?
No, that is through the e-poll book. I have to log in a different manner.
There'd be a third instance as well if they have been issued an early ballot.
If they had been issued one and have already voted it. If they were simply mailed an early ballot, but the Pima County Recorder's Office had not yet received it, we are going to let them, we're going to process them as a regular voter in theory. It will be marked that they had been sent one, but it had not been received by the time they walked in.
That's dangerous.
So they're
So,
going to
yeah,
think that
Miss-
they voted twice.
No. If,
You can only get one ballot per county. That's not the current law.
I think the recorder's office wants to.
Ms. Chuba?
Yes. So our office is going to stop processing provisional ballots at the end of business day on the Monday night before the election. And therefore, if somebody has voted an early ballot and it's in the mail or it comes in after Election Day, the ballot that's voted at a vote center is the one that will count.
The ballot that's voted first,
Correct.
in theory,
Correct.
or the ballot that's tabulated by the recorder's office first, or not tabulated, received by the
Received,
recorder's
yes.
office first,
Yes.
is the one that's counted,
Correct.
which is exactly the way we handled it before.
Correct.
If you voted a provisional ballot because you had received an early ballot, but it had not been received by the recorder's office yet, you voted the provisional, and whichever one was counted, received, processed first is the one that was tabulated.
That is correct.
Okay. So that's not something new as a result of this change.
Yes,
No.
the polling place ballot gets counted. In the previous situation, it got verified first.
If they've been given an early ballot and they show up at the vote center and they say, I haven't voted my early ballot, then they vote a provisional, is that correct?
No, that's what Mr. Wisely is saying, is they vote a regular ballot. It will say that they were mailed an early ballot, and our system knows that as well. But
So I guess the question certainly Commissioner White has, and I'd ask to have it addressed as well, is how is it that we don't double count those? How is it that we don't count both those ballots? What's in the system that keeps that from happening?
So when we download the data from the election day, the credits for voting into our system, then we will process any early ballots that we received on election day. And if it shows that that voter had already voted at a vote center, then if a mail-in ballot comes in for that same voter, that one will not count.
Commissioner Bickle, Mr. Chair, may I?
Ms. Hargrove?
So I think what they're trying to convey is that the recorder's office will stop processing early ballots at a point. At that point, they will then download the voter lists that we will load onto the actual poll books that would be at the polling place. Anybody who has returned their early ballot and they have recorded it, sent it over to be counted, will show as voting. Their ballot is marked. Anybody who has not at that point will still show that they were issued an early ballot, but it has not been returned and voted. And so that's how we know that we can vote them as a regular voter, because they're still showing as an early ballot being issued, but not actually voted. Is that right? Yeah. Cool.
I'll take your word for it.
So I'm sorry, to finish the provisional process.
Commissioner Preble and then Commissioner White.
If someone has shown up at another polling place and has signed in and shown the ID, I'm understanding that if they show up at another vote center, that they will not be allowed to vote.
Correct. They can claim that they did not vote, be issued a provisional, and then go to jail for trying to cheat.
We don't do that.
Yeah. So, no, they would be prevented from voting twice. Correct.
So you're going to turn away voters?
That's why we allow them to do a provisional. If they insist they have not voted, they have the right to vote a provisional. And so at that point, we would vote them a provisional. If they have already voted, their first one counts, their second one goes to the county attorney.
The last polling place I worked, there were 15 people who came in, and it was absent, early ballot, early ballot, early ballot, and these people never vote early ballot. So they had to do the provisional, and so there was inflation of provisional ballots, which justifies this new method, which actually they were probably false early ballots, fake early ballots, and I'll say the word.
I want to explain to the audience that might be watching this. I'm not persona non grata up here, but I have a back injury that prevents me from being comfortable sitting in a chair, so I'm moving back and forth a little bit. I don't have a technical objection to the procedure that's being discussed here because we have long relied on the software in the election management system to catch that second ballot, to prevent only one ballot or to allow only one ballot to be counted. So I don't have a problem with the technical aspects of it. I have a abiding concern about the legal aspects of it. It's not consistent with the current law. And until we can get the legislature and the Secretary of State to agree to a change in the law and implement that in the election procedures manual, we're not allowed to do it, period.
Benny, could you explain that further?
Well, I don't want to cite the statute here, but it's in the statute that talks about how to obtain a ballot when you show up at the polling place. It indicates that if the precinct register is marked that you have an early ballot, that one has been mailed to you, then you will be allowed to vote a provisional ballot, not a regular ballot.
Elections recorder. The PA system isn't broken. We're just waiting for somebody to figure out what the answer is.
Mr. Chairman, while we're waiting, I've been told the video feed outside this building is still not working. There's no link on the website, so people outside are not getting the feed. So if we could fix that, it'd be nice.
So,
I can confirm that the link on the Pima County public facing page to join the YouTube site is not on there. I think that's what whoever's communicating with them is referring to. They're looking for the link
Correct.
to the YouTube site on the pimacounty.gov site. I'm there right now, and that link is not present.
Right, and it's usually on the Pima EIC agenda site as well. That's where it should be. It says attend meeting. It's not there.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, that they can join directly from YouTube if they search that way, but I think they're searching through the pima.gov platform.
Thank you.
Mr. Wisely.
yes, if I can finish the demo, then I can look into that issue. It timed out because we were there. Sorry. So if I have someone who's not eligible, I can go to more options and provide them with a provisional and the reason, find their ballot. They would have to sign. We would then issue them a ballot. And put in we would have them fill out our regular provisional ballot envelopes, and it has a tracking number on it. That would be the number the poll worker would put in, and then we would process them as we normally would. Is there anything else you would like to see on the e-poll book?
I have a question. Have you tried this system out on somebody who has been an inspector for years? Can they easily learn it? You seem a little hesitant yourself. And secondly, have you tried the system on somebody who's never done it before?
We have done it on people who, on both to a limited extent. We've trained our warehouse people who have no familiarity with working the polls or little to get them up to speed, but we were also working on our workflows. So our training was a little confusing for them, a little more confusing than it should have been. And then we have done people who had limited inspector experience. And again, it was more an issue with how early stages on our workflow is saying, this is how we're going to set up the polling place and work them through it. The e-poll book itself seems to be fairly intuitive. It's just making sure we stay out of our own way.
Right. I'm particularly concerned about inspectors who've been doing it for 20 years the same way, and now they have to change their way of doing things.
We have not scaled up that to there yet, but that is intended.
Commissioner Hurley.
A couple quick questions. I suppose we'll see this next week, but is this the typical distance between the...
No.
Okay.
I just, but depending on the size of the center, we would have everything close together so that the person grabbing the ballot could hand it to the person who's going to hand it off. So that would be very close in about this area.
Okay, good. Are you connecting the iPads then, but even in the close proximity, are you connecting them through the Wi-Fi routers?
Yes. They are electronically connected, I will say that.
But you're going to use a Wi-Fi router?
But we're using the cradle point device. Let me be a little vague at this point first.
Well, is that the router you're using back there on that thing?
That is the cradle point device sitting on the...
Is that by any chance a Netgear router?
No.
Okay.
The manufacturer is Cradle Point.
Gotcha. Okay. Because I'm picking up some weird networks here. Okay. Just want to verify I'm not picking up your router here. How far does that signal go out as far as perimeter of the thing? How far does it broadcast?
They are,
Well, that's what I'm worried about. I mean, sorry, if it's a Wi-Fi router that you're hooking up these printers to, it's going through the cradle point.
correct.
So that signal is being broadcast.
Yes, we have not locked it down completely yet.
Some of these Wi-Fi routers have like a 300-foot radius that they broadcast on. Somebody could sit out there in the parking lot. That's what I'm concerned about. That's what all the concerns are about, of how they access these things. A good hacker can, they can get that signal.
They have to be a great one, not just a good one. The level of security that we will, of multiple layers that will be added to these devices will require essentially nation-state actors. And the value of interference other than causing confusion will not be, that's not the way to go. It's much easier to go through legal channels and tell lies or do that to influence voting than to try to individual devices on that scale.
Simple question for you, though. Sometimes the simplest answer I've learned as an engineer is the best. If these things are in close proximity, why not just connect them by wires, use USB cables and stuff like that, instead of trying all this connection stuff? Connect them, hardwire them together, and then you've got the one final connection out to the cradle point. That seems like a simple solution, and you don't have any potential for internal access to that system.
And that is one option.
Okay.
But then you have wire devices may present tripping hazards or other. There's nothing that's solution-free. There's also, although I understand what you're saying.
And that's why I asked the distance question about the stuff. So, okay, I'll leave it to you. I'm done.
And I guess if you've got a Wi-Fi signal, you've got a Wi-Fi signal. It doesn't matter that this is hooked to that by wire. The Wi-Fi signal is still going out.
Well, the difference is, though, that the Wi-Fi signal between printers and these cradle points, the printers, unless there's something I don't know about, have some special connection to them, that's a standard Wi-Fi signal. Okay, and you can use the WPAs and all that kind of stuff as a point to the signal going from the cradle plate to the web is a totally different type of a link, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So that is, we'll call it much more secure. But connecting things in this room through a Wi-Fi, that's Wi-Fi, kind of thing. So that's my concern.
But there are layers of security put on top of that as well.
Okay.
Mr. Chair,
Commissioner Mason.
I have a very easy question for you, Mr. Wisely. We have consumables for the printers.
Yes.
How will they be distributed amongst the various vote centers? What's the methodology there?
Each printer will come with the different type of consumables, essentially the inks, but they'll start with a standard package. And then depending on the expected turnout, each site will have a number of ballot stock.
Excellent, thank you.
And then we can deploy additional through the day if needed. And all of that, of course, will be tracked.
Excellent, thank you.
Anything else from anybody?
I do have something if we're going to close the discussion.
Yeah. Commissioner White?
David, thank you for the presentation. I'm concerned about a number of things with this system. Pima County is not the only user of this system in Arizona. It's been in use in Arizona for quite some time. I'm disappointed that the vendor has not acknowledged that we have hundreds of thousands of military, active duty, reservists, guardsmen, and retirees in the state. And the military ID card cannot be used as a form of identification in this device. That's very disappointing to me. Maybe at some point in the future, that will be available. I want to note for all the lawyers that are going to be looking at this later, that the signature that's captured on that pad is not in any way useful for comparison to a valid legal signature of record that would be compared in the example of a petition challenge or verification of a voter signature in the voter records. Any kind of a scribble across that space on that iPad will suffice to be a signature for purposes of voting. But the identification requirement is actually the identity requirement satisfaction. We've never checked, as far as I'm aware, the signatures in the printed register precinct list versus the signature of record. There may have been some lawsuits involved in that, I don't know, but that's not a routine matter that we're involved in. I'm still concerned about the overheating of the printers. My understanding is that you're going to do some stress test on that to see if that is actually a problem. I think we're too late now to do anything about it. If the printer overheats and shuts down, that's just the way it's going to be. We're going to have some kind of a backup plan for that at this point. And so the commissioners are aware. I have recommended to the administrator that we have some white hat hacking attempt at this system as installed in a vote center. The response I got from Ms. Hargrove is the county does not currently have a contract with any white hat hackers, and the IT department will do something to demonstrate the electronic security of the system. I don't know what that's going to be involved. I know in the past we've walked around the facility making sure that there was no emissions outside the building and those kind of things. Those are completely inadequate to determine whether or not someone can hack into the system and do something about it. But it does not appear that we're going to do a white hat hacking attempt. And there again, I don't think there's going to be a problem because of the encryption and the way that these signals are generated and transmitted. But I know there's going to be lawsuits about it, and I'd certainly like to have some documented testing proof that we can show that at least we took a look at it and we were satisfied that these systems were secured. So with that, and we have to straighten this out about the provisional ballots. You can't violate the law. You can't do things that you don't have authority to do. I understand that that's frustrating, but that's the way it works. So make sure that you look at the laws about how a voter obtains a ballot and when they do or do not have to vote a provisional ballot with reference to those that have been sent an early ballot. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, I'm sorry.
Commissioner Mace.
I think Benny brings up an excellent point. I know he's, pretty close to a subject matter expert on this, so I give credence to his word about the law. Just quick question, has anyone from elections or recorders spoken to the Pima County Attorney's Office Civil Division about this, or is this the first time that we're hearing about this? No, looks like the first time. Okay, just.
Ms. Casares-Kelly.
Yeah, if we could get your concerns in writing, then we can consult with legal. But through everything that we have through the election procedures manual, through everything that we've had, there is no problem with this. And again, I would like to check with legal, and we can double check that. However,
Yeah, I think, and from what I can see here on the dais, it's clear that, Benny has a concern. I think it would definitely behoove everyone involved that we at least check with legal. Maybe it's just a disagreement or misinterpretation of the law, but I think it's definitely something that I feel pretty strongly in saying, I at least, and I'm sure others would feel better if that was at least, that box was ticked.
Mr. Chair, may I just correct something that Commissioner White mentioned about ITD? ITD is checking to see if they can find someone that can do the white hat hacking. They are not going to do like a preliminary walk-around test or anything like that, but they're going to see if they can find someone to actually participate in that.
If we don't get it for the primary, is there a chance that we could get it for the general, seeing as it gives us a few extra weeks to make it happen?
I think we could probably work with the Secretary of State and security there to get someone to come in and do a test.
Okay. Anything else? Okay, next agenda item, resolution for SB 1362. This is an action item. I'll move the item. Is there a second?
I second.
Okay, we have a second and a third. Discussion. Commissioner White.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We were advised on, I think, last week, that on June 6th, Governor Ducey signed into law Senate Bill 1362. Senate Bill 1362, in my opinion, that this bill was put forward by Senator Mesnard. The original bill was mandatory for all counties to put in place a system by and before the general election of 2024, such that a voter who had received a vote by mail, referred to in the law as an early ballot, could walk into a vote center or a polling place on election day and demand that their ballot be counted in the polling place or the vote center and reported both at the precinct polling vote center and in the county canvass as separate from the regular ballots that were cast on a voting on election day. The law is reactive, in my opinion, to the fact that Donald Trump lost the election in 2020. It is completely unnecessary, and there is no evidence that we can base our decisions on as to how many people are going to show up at a polling place or a vote center and demand that their ballot be counted and printed and a report printed. But in order to accommodate this new law, we will have to have at least some modification of our current voting systems. Currently, our voting systems in Pima County, at least, we don't even count ballots in a polling place or a vote center. We move all those ballots to a central count facility and count them there. But the voters wanted this, or at least Senator Mesnard was convinced that the voters wanted this, and the legislators passed it into law. So it's going to require some modification of our election systems. It will require some modification of our elections procedures. I don't know what that's going to involve entirely at the present time, and I don't think anyone else actually does either, because we have not talked to the election systems vendors, the manufacturers, to see what it will take to implement this law and comply with it. And I think we need some time to do that. As it stands right now, this law will be in effect for the 2022 general election. And so there would be a lot of jumping through hoops to be able to comply with it. Now, the response I got back from the governor's office when I complained about signature on this bill was that the bill was permissive. Counties can do whatever they want. Well, to a certain extent, that's true. But they have to do what's in the Elections Procedures Manual. There's nothing in the Elections Procedures Manual about this right now. So legally, we can't do anything about it right now. At some point, we'll have an elections procedures manual, and we can proceed pursuant to that. But in the interim, voters are going to become aware of this. Lawyers are already aware of it. There's a lot of people that want to make sure that that mail ballot that they cast got counted. We've been doing this for 15 years. People have been satisfied that the mail ballots get counted and they're accurately reported. But for some reason this year, we've lost our mind and we decided that we're going to go crazy with changing the way we conduct elections in this state. I'll close with this remark. This bill allows the public to know exactly how individual voters voted their particular individual ballot. If a Fed-only voter shows up at a vote center and casts a ballot, that will show up on these various reports as a Fed-only voter, and it will show exactly how that voter voted each of the races on their ballot. That violates the Arizona Constitution. We can't do that. It also violates the Voting Rights Act. With respect to county permissiveness, we have a 14th Amendment that says that everyone, all citizens, are going to receive equal protection of the law. That means that everybody's ability to have their vote counted equally to other people, equally situated, will be protected by the government officials. In this case, this law says that it's completely arbitrary how your vote gets counted. It's up to some election officials someplace, or maybe the Board of Supervisors. We have a requirement in Arizona that we have general election laws that apply to the entire state, because we elect governors and senators and attorneys general and all other kinds of offices statewide. So you can't have a system where some people in some counties get to vote one way and some people in other counties get to vote another way. It violates the 14th Amendment. So I think it's bad policy. I think there's some technical reasons that it shouldn't be implemented right away. I think we need some time to look at it. So my proposal is that we ask the Board of Supervisors to file a legal cause of action in Superior Court asking for a restraining order deferring implementation of this law until after the 2022 general election. And then we'll let matters proceed from there. So I ask you for support of this resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner White. Commissioner Tillman.
I support the resolution, but I have a couple of questions. Penny, stay here so you can answer. You indicated that the original version said something. You never told us what the current version says. Can you explain the difference and what is permissive in the current version?
The entire procedure is permissive in the current version, whereas in the introduced version, it was mandatory for all counties prior to the 2024 general election. Senator Messner was not able to get enough votes to pass the bill, and so they changed the language to be that the county may implement this, but they removed the election date such that the bill as signed into law is now effective 90 days after sine die, assuming that at some point the legislature is going to wrap up and go home, which is not certain. But probably the law would be effective for this year's general election.
I'm still not clear. As I read the law, it applies to areas that already have a tabulation in the polling place system. How many counties already have that option?
I don't know. I know that Maricopa County does, and that's the center of this effort to change these procedures.
So it would be mandatory for Maricopa County or permissive for Maricopa County?
It would be permissive
Thank you.
for Maricopa County as well, under the current law, until a court says that the permissiveness violates the 14th Amendment.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, Commissioner Hurley.
Just curious, these things go through legal review, and I'm not that familiar with the law, I did read through it. These things go through legal review at the legislature, and wondering if are you familiar, what was their argument that said this was not a violation of those laws? I mean, it's curious if you, it's a lot of digging around, I didn't have time to go do that, I'm just curious if you heard any of those arguments.
No, I've had a kind of a short-term notice on this. I don't live in Maricopa County, Phoenix, and I'm not on a daily basis conversant with the legislators.
I think
Commissioner Tillman.
I think the bill went through pretty quickly, and maybe it didn't get a decent review.
And I would say something that gives credence to that is it had one sponsor, and that was Senator Mesnard, and he's the one that also submitted the amendments to change it. So, you know, it may very well have been kind of a last-minute thing. Just for clarity, the resolution is presented by Commissioner White, so you know what we're asking you to vote on. Whereas the Governor of Arizona recently signed into law SB 1362, and whereas SB 1362 and the included statutory changes will be effective for the November 8th, 2022 general election, and whereas compliance with the various requirements of the new laws involving changes to polling place and early voting procedures will cause confusion and loss of confidence in our elections among the voters, and whereas compliance with the various requirements of the new law may involve substantial changes to the software and election management systems used by Pima County, and whereas disclosure of much of the information required by these new laws may cause violation of the Arizona constitutional requirement for secrecy of the ballot, as well as violations of various federal and state election laws, and whereas any changes to the election software will require recertification of the election management system used by Pima County, therefore be it resolved that the Pima County Election Integrity Commission recommends that the Pima County Board of Supervisors take immediate legal action in the Pima County Superior Court and other courts as necessary by filing a claim for a temporary restraining order to hold the execution of the provisions of SB 1362 in abeyance until after the November 8th, 2022 general election, in order to give Pima County election officials and the Pima County Attorney's Office sufficient time to investigate the implications of any changes to election management systems or election procedures that might be required for full compliance and any potential violations of the Arizona Constitution and other state and federal election laws. Any further discussion? Commissioner Atkins.
Yes.
Commissioner DeLarge.
Yes.
Commissioner Mace.
Yes.
Commissioner Hurley.
Yes.
Commissioner Tillman.
Yes.
Commissioner White.
Yes.
Commissioner Kirshen.
I abstain.
Commissioner Preble.
Yes.
And the chair votes in the affirmative. The measure passes 8-0 with one abstention. We can't agree on something sometimes.
Mr. Chair, before you continue, this is Jesus. The links for this, to stream this meeting are working, and they're on the website now.
Thank you, Mr. Federico. Next agenda item D, to allow observers at the early polling sites is an action item. Is there a motion to accept this?
Commissioner Preble, this may be a moot point if we are allowing observers at the early vote centers. I don't know if that's been discussed and finalized.
That would be a question for the recorder, since the early voting centers are her purview.
We are not allowing observers at the early voting site simply due to space. Many of the locations that we have scheduled are small. They're small. That is not conducive to observers. However, we will be allowing observers, as we have in the past, at the ballot processing center.
Commissioner Preble.
My resolution, as we understand,
Motion.
I move that we pass this resolution as presented in documentation on the dais.
Is there a second? Second. I have a motion and a second. Is there discussion? Commissioner Tillman.
If you limit observers to one from each party at any one time, will there still be places where this was not enough space for those people?
Yes, many of the locations are, so the country club facility, for example, is it's too small to accommodate that number of people. The Cells location, too small. There's a number of locations.
That's unfortunate.
Commissioner Hurley.
Go ahead.
Then Commissioner White.
Go ahead. I'll defer to Betty.
What legal authority do you have to exclude observers? I don't see any exception based on your choice of locations for early voting sites.
We will consult with legal. But
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your response.
We will consult with legal, but this is a safety concern for our staff.
Perhaps you should have chosen different sites that had more space to comply with the law.
Commissioner Hurley.
That was why I deferred to Commissioner White. I knew he had the question.
Many of the locations that we are using are Pima County facilities. Many of them are libraries.
Is there further discussion, questions on the resolution? Commissioner Atkins, you have a quizzical look.
You mentioned a library, and I know most libraries have room to have observers, and I think it's a very bad optics not to have representatives from parties observing, since it's been that way in the past for so long. So I hope that there's a way to work around that somehow.
Further discussion, or are you ready to read your resolution?
No, I'd like to make a point.
Commissioner Preble.
It is Arizona revised statutes. We cannot go around it, and I know there are lawyers waiting in the wings, just waiting for this to go south.
Further discussion.
I wonder if Ms.
Commissioner
Preble
Tillman.
would accept an amendment to say,
Can't amend.
good. Wonder if Ms. Preble would accept an amendment to put in as feasible, something like that, so that we don't have to force a safety problem if that's the case.
It's in statute. We can't get around it, just like what we were talking about, permissible versus non-permissible. It's the law. It's already been codified. It's done.
Further discussion. Commissioner Preble, would you read your...
Okay. As we understand that our duty is to ensure that Pima County comply with all election laws in the state of Arizona, including those encompassed in Title 16. As we understand that early voting centers are polling places by definition. As we understand that our job on the Election Integrity Commission is to advise the Board of Supervisors to be in compliance with the law. As we can read the actual law below, which allows for absolutely no exceptions, I resolve that we advise the Board of Supervisors to allow election observers in the 15 early voting centers.
Commissioner Atkins,
I have to say yes.
Commissioner DeLarge,
Yes.
Commissioner Mace,
Yes?
Commissioner Hurley,
Yes?
Commissioner Tillman,
Yes. Reluctant, yes.
Commissioner White,
Yes.
Commissioner Kirshen,
Yes.
Commissioner Preble,
Yes.
and the chair votes in the affirmative. The issue passes 9-0. Next agenda item, staffing levels at recorder and election staff's permanent staff, not interim staff for the elections. A status update, Commissioner Tillman.
Yes, I understand that Ms. Franklin has left the recorder's office, and I wonder if she has been replaced and if there are other levels. Last time you told us there was an IT position that was open, so I wondered about the replacement for those positions.
Okay. Yes. Pam Franklin, who was with our department for 10 years, has moved on to another county department and is now there. And she has been, her position has now been filled by Hillary Heiser, my assistant chief deputy. She has been promoted, which the assistant chief deputy position is being advertised as of today, so it's up on our website. So if you want to help us recruit for that. We have since the last time I think we spoke, I will just kind of give you a little bit. There have been some retirements and promotions, mostly promotions from within. We have promoted a 5-year voter clerk into the manager position, and we have now 2 supervisors, 2 voter supervisors, one of which has been with the office for nearly 6 years and had previously been detailed as a supervisor under the previous administration. We have the IT manager, we have filled that position. Our IT manager has a background of over 20 years in federal government IT, including security, and most recently came to us from the Bureau of Indian Affairs and previously worked with the U.S. Post Office, where they're still utilizing the software that he developed. We have within our IT department a developer who has been with the department for 15 years, first as a voter registration clerk, and then he moved to IT department within our internal IT in 2011. And we have our IT tech systems admin who's been with our office for 6 years. So we're consistently showing of our intermittent staff, returning folks, and we will, so it's a pause until after the primary.
Thank you. And the same question for the elections department. Has Ms. Martinson's position been filled at this point?
No, her position has not been filled. Actually, I reallocated the position. It is actually a manager's position now, administrative manager. So we'll take on a few additional responsibilities in the office. We are interviewing for that position on June 24th. And the deputy position is open as well, and we do have some applicants anticipate interviewing before the end of the month for that position.
And are all the staff working with David Wisely returning, or are there replacements there?
Are you referring to intermittents or permanent staff?
The permanent?
They're still there.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Anything else from anybody? Questions, comments? Next agenda item, final disposition of vaccine mandates. Commissioner Hurley. I kind of puzzled by this one since we voted down a resolution last month. I don't know what you want to do in addition to that. It's come up and it was defeated, and how much more final do you want it to be?
If you'll give me a chance, Mr.
Sure.
Chairman. I put this on as an afterthought, basically. after the Board of Supervisors last week, and I was in the audience. I believe, Ms. Hargrove, you were there as well last Tuesday. The Board of Supervisors voted 3-1 to drop the vaccine mandate for election workers. So I thought I was going to celebrate a victory here. Turns out it was too early. Turns out one of our workers, yes, a Republican, I got an email that said somebody in the elections department, named Gloria, I don't have her last name, I wish I did, rejected his employment, if you will, part-time, as an election worker, claiming that he was not in the, quote, classification that the Board of Supervisors covered. Now, I sat here in the audience, and I listened to the Board of Supervisors. There was not one single mention. They didn't go through the job classifications in the department, say, oh, this one gets it, this one doesn't, this one doesn't. They voted to drop it. They voted to drop the $50 thing for the vaccines. And yet I get an email from somebody that says they won't let me work. I forwarded that to Supervisor Christie's office. Ms. Hargrove, I believe you got a copy of that. That's a week ago. Where are we? This reminds me of somebody up there that doesn't like the policy, and the phrase comes to mind, malicious compliance, all right? This has to stop. What have you done about this? It's been a week, and we haven't seen any response. That's why it's on the agenda, Mr. Chairman.
Happy to respond.
Ms. Hargrove?
Yes. So, Commissioner Hurley, what the Board of Supervisors voted for was to lift the mandate for one-day election poll workers. Did not include any election aides or intermittent workers. They're still considered employees. However, it will need to go back to the Board of Supervisors to change that for any intermittent workers. So this individual was returning as an intermittent worker, and that's why he was excluded. Of course, he was referred to HR to file a religious exemption if there was one available to him, but that is the difference. One-day election poll workers is what they voted for.
I'm sorry, I don't recall that distinction when I sat here in that meeting, and I don't think others did either. Ms. Borazan didn't call it either. Mr. Christie's, Supervisor Christie's assistant. Again, this reminds me of the phrase, of the concept of malicious compliance. The intent, I'm sure, was to let people work the elections without having to go through this nonsense, okay? The law is going to change in 90 days anyway. Why are we playing these games? Because it's a game. Why are we doing this? Why can't we just get on, get these workers in there, let them do their jobs? In your own email, you complain because you can't get Republican workers. Well, maybe there's a reason for that, all right? Let's drop the nonsense and get on with it, okay? Let's don't play games with classifications and stuff like that.
Not in my control.
I'm sorry?
Not in my control, sir. You need to talk to the Board of Supervisors. That needs to go back to the Board of Supervisors to change that.
I'm sorry, the elections department is your covenant. You could tell this person to hire, to drop this thing.
No, sir. Have to follow HR policy.
This is nonsense. More.
Does anybody have a copy of what the board actually resolved or voted on?
Find it.
Status of the Elections Procedure Manual, Commissioner Hurley.
Yeah. Our recorder mentioned the Elections Procedures Manual. I'd like to know where we are. I mean, what procedures manual are we working to today? But because you know the one that Secretary Hobbs tried to force through, got rejected. So are you working to that old procedures manual still, I hope?
Yeah, unfortunately, that one is the procedures manual that we're currently using. The one that had been proposed by Secretary of State it's really unfortunate that that had not been approved, because the recorders statewide and elections directors statewide had all had input on that procedures manual. We had monthly meetings, which were very cumbersome for our staff to be able to do that, and to review that language and to sit in on those meetings, and a lot of work went into those. And we do not understand why it was not approved. We tried to submit our support for that version, and unfortunately, it sounds as if it was a political decision to not approve that, because that would have helped clarify state statute and how to implement specific interpretations, and it would have given us a more concise procedures manual to be working off of, as opposed to having to seek specific interpretations by county. So that is very unfortunate. I do support that Secretary of State's version that had gone up for approval. The Recorders Association, of the 15, 9 of them are Republican recorders. There's 1 independent, and there are 5 Democrats. And we had come to a consensus, all of us, that, talking about the different scenarios and limitations or specific needs within each of our counties, and making sure that our voice was reflected within that document. And so I am very sad that it did not move forward for approval. Until then, we are forced to use the 2018 version, 2019 version, and seek clarification and interpretation from our county attorneys.
I'd just like to interject something here as it relates to the comment regarding the lack of acceptance by the Attorney General of the current Secretary of State's proposed procedure manual. I believe, and if somebody wants to prove me wrong, I'd welcome that proof, but we went an entire Secretary of State's term under this same Attorney General without an updated procedure manual. Secretary of State Reagan never presented for approval an elections procedure manual. We went from Ken Bennett to Katie Hobbs. So there's precedent for using the old one. It creates problems, but something totally out of our control, and it would be nice if the people in Phoenix learned how to play well with each other, but that seems to be a little bit of a challenge. Voter roll cleanup, Commissioner Hurley.
This is something, I believe there was a bill for the legislature, I don't know the status of it, but trying to do enforce or maybe get more information on voter roll cleanup. The Motor Voter Act requires a cleanup, regardless of what the state has proposed. The NVRA requires recorders or counties, whoever is in charge, to go through a process of cleaning out the old people, the people that haven't voted for 10, whatever, how many years. There's a very distinct procedure. I guess my question is, what steps are you taking to comply with the NVRA?
Thank you, Commissioner Hurley. There's a number, so there's a ton of different things that we do to maintain our voter rolls. Most recently, we did send out 90-day notices. We send out information to voters. If we receive returned mail, it then goes into the NVRA process where letters are sent, the voters can update. There's 35 days with no response. The voter may be moved to the inactive status. That does not mean that they are removed from the voter rolls, but it does mean that they won't continue to receive mail. And so in this past for the 90-day notices? We sent out 90-day notices for all voters who were on the active early voting list. We had about 11,000 people who moved within Pima County, a little more than that. About 1,600 people who moved within the state, 6,000 people who moved out of the state of Arizona, 12,000 people who didn't provide a forwarding address, and we had over 1,500 signatures updates from the City of Tucson elections and also the Service Arizona Easy Voter service. But we also review deaths through the Secretary of State's office. They provide us with information from the Department of Health. We use an ERIC monthly, it's a ERIC. Hold on. I got those acronyms right here. Electronic Registration Information Center. They provide us with information regarding cross-state. We have our staff review all recorded documents for death certificates, and we check against our voter file monthly. Staff reviews obituaries daily from several local publications, online and printed. And if we receive a note from someone not on a voter, that the voter has passed away, a letter is sent. So there's a lot that happens there. We are a participant of the AVID system, which is the Secretary of State's database. And we check for duplicate matches with people who've moved to other counties. It checks for felony convictions where the courts have notified the Arizona Secretary of State's office, and also includes motor vehicle division information. We compare our data against the SAVE database, which is the system for alien verification for entitlements. Federally, we're not able to use that as simply as a means for list maintenance, but in a situation where maybe the voter submitted the alien registration number but didn't provide us with certificate of proof, in that way we are able to consult the SAVE database. And then we check for anomalies in our recording, checking for duplicate matches for Arizona driver's licenses and social security numbers and those types of things. We run reports with the United States Postal Service for NCOA, National Change of Address forms, and then we also, as part of the ERIC cross-state mover efforts, I think 34 other states send us notifications when somebody matches when a voter moves out of state, and they send us that data, and we can determine in whose jurisdiction, who's the most recent, I don't want to say owner of that information, but the whose jurisdiction they then fall into. So we're constantly updating our voter rolls, and it's very intensive, and we're currently doing that now. And again, we did send out those what we call 90-day notices, and that also gives an opportunity for voters to make changes. So for example, if they normally get an early voting ballot sent to their home, but they're going to be out of town, they're able to delay that or defer that, or it enables us to connect with voters about what their needs are for this upcoming election and for the general. And we're still receiving those.
If I may go back, you mentioned the dead voter thing, and you kind of went right past that, but that's a problem that we've run into. You go out there, you're canvassing or whatever, and you knock on the door and say, oh, my father died 5 years ago, but he's still getting the ballot. But you mentioned something about sending a letter, because we've always found and told that this is a very difficult thing to do after the fact, because if the county health department or whatever doesn't communicate that initially, then it's very, very difficult to get them off 3 or 4 years later. So I think what is the process for doing that? What's that letter you just mentioned?
Okay, so for dead voters, well, and, it would also depend on, where that person died, where their death certificate was filed. If somebody, and every situation is unique. And we don't know, and it is very sensitive, and we don't want to mistakenly mark voters as dead when they're not. And
let's just stick with the voters who died in Pima County.
Right.
Okay, because that does happen, and it
Yeah.
gets passed, whatever. I know there are situations, I understand all those.
Right.
But let's stick
So-
Pima County.
So we go through the the Secretary of State's office provides us with information for the Arizona Department of Public Health. So the Department of Health Services, they provide us with that information. We go through the ERIC database, which provides us with Social Security information from the Social Security Administration. So we receive that federal data. Again, we're checking for death certificates, checks against the voter file. If there is a situation like that, my question would be, why hasn't this been reported? If someone is receiving a deceased person's mail or anything, they should be replying return to sender. They won't. Then that would put that mail into the NVRA, and they wouldn't receive those notices any further, and they would be listed as inactive until they could be confirmed as deceased. So my concern for that is always if is everyone's responsibility to share that information, to return mail. Their mail is federally protected. They're supposed to return it. They're not supposed to be opening that mail, and that would get it within the system. And so depending on the situation, we do have an ability to check with the Secretary of State's office for an individual, do we have a deceased record for this? And again, we're even checking within our office to see if we have anything on the recording side of the house, to see if any death certificates have been recorded there. And again, we're relying on the public to share that information with us and to notify us that problem is occurring. For 5 years, there is receiving. You know what I'm saying? There is a delay because we don't get that quickly. We get it takes a couple of months for us to get so if somebody were to pass away today, they may still their deceased loved one may still receive a ballot if it's before the deadline. But it's their responsibility to return that to us, and then we can start that process and go through the statewide databases.
Okay, thank you. By the way, if you knock on enough doors, you'll run across everything out there, trust me. But
Been there, done that. Absolutely.
Any other questions? I have a couple. Does anybody go through the obituaries in the Arizona Daily Star, or is that something that is not considered viable as far as verifying deaths of voters is concerned?
I'm sorry, would you repeat the question?
Does somebody go through the obituary column on a daily basis?
Yes. I'm sorry, I shared that with initially. Yes, we consider that a soft match. Of course, there are misprints there, so we always make sure that there is a hard match with the databases, that aforementioned databases. But that is considered a soft match, and we do take that into consideration as well. And then also, in regards to the knocking doors, a lot of times we're utilizing data that has been obtained by parties. If that is the situation, sometimes parties may be using outdated data. So there's no, unless it's coming from our office directly, they may or may not have the most up-to-date data.
And the other one doesn't deal with dead people voting as much as it does the issue particularly of snowbirds. How do we determine their state of residence? I mean, there's people that would like to register their car in Washington State because the license plates are cheap and there's no income tax, but they want to register to vote in Arizona. And you can only have one legal state of residence. What kind of system do we have for determining that we've got people that aren't trying to scam the system in that way?
Thank you, Chair. I'll be happy to answer that question for you. The way our system works is that we have correspondences with other states. So the example that you've given, individuals registering their vehicles in one state and wanting to vote in another state, whichever state has the voter registration that is most recent is considered the voter's state. So if a snowbird indicated that they lived 6 months here in the state of Arizona, they had property here, they had utility bills, they had the ability to verify themselves and their residence here for Arizona other than a driver's license, and also verify their citizenship and register to vote here, we would contact their state where their registration of their vehicle is, and we would say that we are the voting state and that state is not. Oftentimes with those particular citizens that do live within two different states, they will vote is not the correct word. They will register to vote in both states, and then we will have to once again confirm with one another who has the most recent registration, and whoever has the most recent registration, they are a voter of that state. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair? Just
Commissioner Mace.
we have a couple of new voice. Could you just please identify yourself for the commission?
Yes, I'm sorry. Hillary Heiser, I'm the Chief Deputy Recorder.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have a question.
Commissioner Preble.
As I understand, we don't have reciprocity with all 50 states. Can you clarify those numbers?
We do have reciprocity with states. Our standard forms we get are from the ERIC. We will also contact states individually if a voter says, I've coming from, say, West Virginia, and we don't have something with West Virginia, we will reach out and try to verify and let them know that we have changed the voter registration. So we do specifically reach out. We also, whenever we have new voters register and they say we're from a different state, we always remind them, please contact your original state, let them know that you've moved to cancel your voter registration as well. Because there is a lag time from the information that we have versus the information that the other states have, and vice versa. Most of the information that we receive is routed through the Secretary of State's office, who then contacts the other Secretary of States and then routes that information back to us.
And I also understand there's a judge in Santa Cruz County who's having her election mail forwarded to a non-Arizona residence, and maybe we could look into that. If you're not Santa Cruz County, I guess I would have to file that complaint with Santa Cruz County.
And thank you. And there's also, election mail is not forwardable. So you cannot forward any of that mail. And it will be returned to us. And again, it will go through the NVRA process, and that voter will become inactive within our system.
Anyone else?
I have one.
Commissioner Tellman.
Do you track restoration of voting rights? So
No.
if a person becomes eligible to vote who wasn't eligible to vote, do you track that information so they don't get prosecuted for registering illegally?
No, we do not track that information. They can provide us with with their documentation from the courts, but no, that is generally something that is not tracked, and we do heavily encourage voters who are within that status or unsure of what their status is to go through the Public Defender's Office. They provide free rights restoration clinics and services, and so we recommend that they just to double check and confirm their information, and that information is also, their contact information is listed on our website.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hurley.
Actually, I believe the process is, I helped somebody once a while back get their rights restored. It turned out to be a very simple process. All he had to do was look at the requirements in the law. It said, if you've done this, this, and this, or you didn't do this, that, and other, you can vote. When you sign that voter registration, you are attesting to the fact that you are a legitimate voter. So that's what we did. He confirmed, did you do this? So we didn't have to get into his personal records of legal, all that kind of stuff. He attested to it. He voted. He registered. That was it.
Any other questions? Next item on the agenda, vote center e-poll rollout status. Commissioner Hurley, is there anything more that you...
I think I'm still concerned, absolutely concerned about this. I mean, I'm just not sure. I have very little confidence we're going to pull this off, but I wish you luck. The county's depending on you.
Additional staffing, numbers, and cost.
Okay. When I was at the Board of Supervisors meeting last week, I thought I saw it was constant, it's Hargrove. I thought I heard you refer to hiring additional, like 3 people per polling center. Did I hear that correctly?
Well, I was only there for the demonstration portion, so I wasn't there for the rest of the meeting.
That's fine.
So, no, I'm not sure what that is, but, okay. So the vote centers are staffed according to how many individuals we think may show up to vote, right? So some are larger, some are smaller. The only position that I've added in vote centers is a voting equipment specialist, so someone to troubleshoot the equipment on election day. So no, it's not an increase. We would still have the same number of people. If we had 4 poll book paper rosters there, we would have 4 electronic poll books. So it's pretty much the same.
I heard the number. It was late in the day. Don't recall exactly where it came from,
Yeah,
but I thought it was mentioned 3 extra people. We're already claiming that we're going to save the county money. We're not. We've looked at the numbers. They're not. Okay. And I was concerned about adding extra staff times 129 centers.
Right.
That's a lot of money. So I heard so it wasn't correct.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that number was. Maybe there was a conversation on the dais between the board members, but there's just 1 extra position that I want in the vote centers.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
And as I understand...
Commissioner Preble.
I'm sorry. As I understand, they will be reporting to the inspector under the tutelage of the inspector.
Yes, that is correct. So the makeup of the vote center will not change from the precinct makeup, so the inspector and marshal will pretty much still be in charge of the vote center, and everyone reports to the inspector. That is correct.
Okay, target completion to report results. How many days until we know who wins? That's a good question. I wish you luck with finding out.
Well,
Commissioner Hurley.
I thought that one of the reasons that we were going to the voting centers and things like that was this day to eliminate the provisionals, that we were going to shrink that. It takes like 2 weeks before Arizona knows who wins. I mean, Florida's got 4 times as many people as we do, and they know the next day. And they do early balloting. They do vote mail, maybe not quite as much as we do. Is this new the vote center thing, is that going to get us the results faster? Maybe I won't ask how many days. I'll just say, is it going to get us the results faster?
And I would have to say, I honestly don't know. I would say that I hope so. So you can't quote me on the earlier portion that this would get us votes sooner. But the impetus of that would be less provisional ballots. So if we have less provisional ballots for the recorder's office to actually verify, then we can finish the election quicker. However, we say that the caveat is we need to get through this first election to have any idea of if it's going to be quicker, if it's more efficient. Well, it will be more efficient, but there are things that we will have to work out. And so when we get to the general election, I would have to say, yes, it should be quicker. But at least in the vote center, the process would be smoother, people would get checked in quicker, be able to get their ballots and leave. So if you hold on and let us get through the August primary, then we should have some better information for you.
Well, the primary is, people don't realize, I don't think most people realize, primaries are critical. There are people out there running on clean elections funding. They depend on that result to get their money. And the window is short enough. I know we made it longer a couple of years ago, but it's still pretty short out there. If you're waiting 2, 3 weeks or more, 4 weeks, maybe, I don't know, for your funding, and you're in a contested area and the other candidate has got his or her money, you're behind the 8 ball, all right? So the primaries are critical in that respect. It's not a test ground. They have to work, and they have to work quickly.
Commissioner Tillman.
I believe there are requirements in state law for how many days people have to prove their status, and you can't change that. So if there's even one person, you're still not going to have a final result until you've met that state deadline for reporting.
There are definitely state deadlines, and when I said test, I didn't mean testing the election. The test is to see how long everything takes in the vote center. The processing of the ballots does not change. That is still the same. So if that can be more efficient and we could do a better job at it, we absolutely will.
I think one of the things here, as it relates to speed of notification, has to do with significantly reducing the number of provisional ballots. If that actually comes to pass, then we should see sooner results notification. How much sooner, I think that remains to be seen. But if the numbers I remember are correct, we're talking about reducing the number of provisional ballots by roughly 80%, somewhere between 80 and 85%, going to e-poll books. If that actually happens, then the results would be presumed to be available sooner. If that doesn't happen, then we're no better off than we were before. And there's no way to tell that until we actually have an election.
So I agree. Your response is spot on. I would have expected in the initial project planning, cost-benefit analysis, and all that kind of stuff, that there would be some projections about what the expectations are for the reduction in provisional ballots and all that kind of stuff. I mean, I know you haven't done it before, but you have data from other counties, 11 other counties around the state, to look at to say, hey, how's it working for you guys? How do they reduce it? There are benchmarks out there that we could use. And then in the end, after we go through the process, we look at the results and say, oh, does that result match our expectations here? Is it really getting us what we expected to get? Unfortunately, right now, we don't have that. We don't know what we expect to get, so how do you measure the benefit of the whole project? Recorder.
Ms. Casares-Kelly.
Thank you. So yes, the provisional ballot process has been, that goes through our office, through the recorder's office, and then once those are processed and deemed eligible, then they would go over to the elections department for tabulation, and that's a fairly quick process. So the hang-up has always been the provisional ballots. We had, similar to the Maricopa, their number of provisional ballots last cycle. I think that 80% reduction is what we looked at, the data of voters who were out of precinct. and 80% of those voters were then issued a provisional ballot due to being out of precinct, which Vote Center will eliminate that. Unfortunately, we're not able to compare the cost data analysis with other counties. Maricopa County has 60% of all voters in Arizona. We have 14, and the next comparable size is 6 with Pinal. I think Pinal. And so due to the unique areas, you know, we as Ms. Hargrove said, we are going to have to wait and see what that looks like. But that is the initial basis for why the previous elections director had pushed for vote centers to reduce the number of out-of-precinct ballots, specifically for this reason, because of how cumbersome provisional ballots are. So again, that is an entire carbon copied, handwritten sheet that needs to be processed. It is very difficult. And so that it takes a lot of time. There's a lot of opening of envelopes, and you know, there's a whole process that goes through to verify that voter. And without that, by having the ballots at the vote centers, printed per individual and not bound to that envelope with the handwritten affidavit on the front of it, that time for accepting that ballot is reduced.
Further questions? Okay, post-election independent study of cost-benefit analysis, Commissioner Hurley.
Actually, this kind of light came on when I was listening to the Board of Supervisors last meeting, and the Independent Business Council had suggested something like this. We've got a new system here. Has anybody ever done, and it gets back to my question about the projection, expectations, and all that kind of stuff. Has anybody ever done any kind of independent, and I mean independent outside, hire somebody to come in and look at these systems and determine what went right, what went wrong, was it worth the money, what can we do better, an independent analysis of, you know, is this the right, everybody says, well, 11 counties are doing it. No, I'm sorry, that's not the reason you do something. You do it because it's beneficial to the voter, all right? The voter is the customer out here on this stuff, not the county board of supervisors, all right? So is it beneficial to the voter who's going through this stuff and spending money, that kind of thing? So can we do have an outside company come in? We've got money in there. There's some extra money somewhere. I'm sure there is. You know, we can stop paying for some of these hotels and stuff around here. So that was kind of the motivation there. I think it'd be a great idea to do that. It kind of a little bit goes along with the Whitehead suggestion, getting independent people outside to look at our systems. And, you know, internal analysis doesn't work. Okay? It doesn't work. People, they'll not report the bad news and stuff. So anyway, that was my point there.
Okay, any other comments, questions on that subject? Commissioner Atkins.
I was just going to say, there are so many states that are completely vote centers right now. There has to be data. Have you looked for other states to see if there's data to show cost-benefit analysis?
Well, let's get some of their data and then compare Arizona to them. Are we meeting the benchmarks? Are we doing it the right way? You know, kind of thing. Because they're not all the same. To say that other states are doing it is one thing. They're not all the same. They don't have the issue of provisional ballots, for example, that we have. Are we getting any benefit from that? It concerns me that we don't even have a ballpark number that we would like to see of reduction of provisional ballots. I mean, that just pull some number out and say, hey, we'd like to see this number. But we haven't done that. That's not project management, project planning, all right? So I agree, there's data out there. Let's look at that.
I saw that number, and it might have just been a dream, but it was dropping the provisional ballots from like 18,000 to 3,000 was the target. Now, whether that is actually going to happen or not remains to be seen.
Fine.
Yeah.
Just throw that number. They'll use that number.
Yeah.
I have no problem with that.
Commissioner Mace.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think kind of the overall concern I hear from my fellow commissioner is, and I'm assuming, I don't want to assume, so let me ask a question. Are there plans by the Elections Department and the Recorder's Department for some sort of after-action, lessons learned, best practices, considering we are, and I totally agree with the sentiment, we are implementing a brand new model, which there's going to be some bumps along the way. And considering we're now about to enter an early voting period and a primary and then a national election. So I think what he's saying is kind of larger conceptually, but it's in the same vein as my concern is what after action review is going to be planned so that we can learn better, maybe not for the next election cycle, I'm just talking about the general. And I don't think that's unreasonable. Thank you.
So it's probably going to be independent and then jointly, I would think. So the Elections Department, we definitely will have a review and an analysis of the entire process. So implementing it, preparing for training, what changes need to be done, how things went on Election Day, as well as once the ballots are cast, the provisionals ballots process. Absolutely, I will definitely have that, and you will get that information.
Fantastic. Are there any similar plans for the Recorder's Office?
Yes, I mean, the data on how many provisional ballots we process is a finger's touch away. I don't know if that's the right metaphor. I get them mixed up sometimes, but that's all our data. So I just wanted to point out that Chair Bickle, that was not a fever dream you were having. The information about the cost and the projected savings was part of the supplemental packet for the presentation that we did for you. So it's actually on the EIC website, I believe, as an attachment for that February meeting, if I remember correctly, but it is there. And if anybody wants access to that, feel free to reach out to our office. I'm happy to send it again. But we projected labor cost for print. Paper is no insignificant issue right now for printing out poll rosters for every election polling location, and then also labor for our office for processing those provisional ballots. So that's what we used, and we definitely will review that. You will be able to see how many provisional ballots we processed.
Thank you, Commissioner White.
I understand, Commissioner Hurley, what you're trying to do here, and essentially I support it, but I think the situation is going to be that we can hire McKinsey or some other high-profile auditing firm to come in and do a lot of study and spend a lot of time learning about election law and election procedure and the nature of Pima County and everything else. But we've gone through this process several times in the past, and coming up with valid numbers that capture all of the various elements of cost of conducting elections between special elections and primary elections and general elections, the changes in the law between election seasons, the changing in court orders, dealing with pandemics. It is a variable environment, and it changes every election. So we're focused now, I guess, simply on reduction of provisional ballots, which 95% of them or higher become valid and they get counted. Those numbers can go away, and then we have the savings from processing of provisional ballots. And typically, that involved 2 or 3 days after the election to go through those ballots, give the lawyers a chance to go out and knock on doors and see if people were really there or not, and all that kind of stuff. But you still have about 40,000 ballots in Pima County that the voters, for whatever reason, decide to hold on to that they got in the mail, and then they'd hold on to them to the last day and then walk them into the precinct polling place, all of those have to be processed too. We're not saving anything there by having vote centers. They're still going to have to go through all those ballots. And so the canvass dates are the determinant factor. Typically, that's on the second Tuesday after the election when that happens. And so the fact of when clean elections, people get their money and things, that's not going to change. The canvass drives that. And there are a lot of benefits to vote centers in addition to the provisional ballots. We have much better records. We know actually who went to the polling place, how many ballots should have been collected at that polling place. There's a lot of different factors involved here, and we can go spend money and, like I say, hire these high-profile firms to come in and spend a lot of time and produce a report, but I'm not sure we're going to be any smarter at the end of that process.
Thank you, Commissioner White. Anybody else have any comments or questions? Future agenda items that anybody has for next month?
I assume that we will from now on have a report on what's happening with the current election as it develops.
We'll make sure that gets on the agenda, just to make sure that we have that. One thing as far as future agenda items is concerned, if you're submitting an agenda item that requires a vote, please indicate that it's an action item, and it'll be indicated as such on the agenda. And the procedure for handling that somebody will move the item, we'll take a second, and then discussion will take place. If for some reason you don't have as much support for your initiative as you thought you might have, and there's no second, it just dies and we don't waste any time with the discussion. The other thing I would like to ask of all commissioners, myself included, barring unforeseen circumstances, if you can get agenda items to Mr. Federico at least 2 weeks before the next meeting. That way, if we have information that we're requiring of Pima County staff, we give them as much time as possible to gather that information and provide it for us in an accurate and timely fashion. If you're going to submit a request for a resolution, please get the text of that resolution to Mr. Federico so it can be disseminated to the rest of the commission prior to the meeting that they're going to be asked to vote on it, so we know what we're voting on. We're going through a bit of a learning process here. Barbara told someone yesterday at a celebration of life that we were at that she's been on this commission for centuries. Probably not quite that long. I'm in my 8th year, and we're getting better at what we do, but we have some opportunity to grow. I believe we have 2 resolutions that need to be transmitted to the Board of Supervisors. I will see to it that that happens early next week. Anybody else have anything that needs to be addressed prior to adjournment? Excuse me, Recorder Casares-Kelly.
Yeah, I have concern. I don't know that my staff will be able to attend the July meeting. We're in an active election. As of today, UOCAVA ballots, the Uniformed and Overseas Citizens Abroad Act voters, those ballots are being mailed out, so we are officially at the start of our election season. So I wanted to give you a heads up on that, and then also just I wanted to reiterate that this entire movement towards vote centers, I know that there had been concerns and questions about savings, and of course we do plan on doing debriefs, just as Ms. Hargrove mentioned, together within our 2 departments, and then also internally we will plan on doing that. But also, this is not, the driving force is about our voters and for them to be able to cast their ballots and to exercise one of the most fundamental rights that they have as citizens. And so it is really about making the elections process easier for voters, and less about the cost savings. We are able to conduct our elections with the funds given, but it needs to be accessible to everybody. And so just as a reminder, anytime we're having those conversations about savings, we really also need to make sure that it is at a benefit to the voter. And again, 18,000 provisional ballots, 80% of voters who voted on election day were encountering an issue. So that is not a one-off. That is an indication of a systemic issue that needs to be corrected, and we're the group of individuals who can correct that, and we're moving towards that. 24%, pardon me, 24%. 24% of all voters who voted on election day had experienced a problem and needed to cast a provisional ballot. That's the correct. It's been a while since we gave that presentation, but all that information is there, and we urge you to review that 41-page PowerPoint that we had submitted jointly between our office and the Elections Department. It has even the script of additional information on there, and then those supplemental documents that we submitted. We spent a lot of time pulling that information together, and it does have a lot of these, the answers to some of your questions. Thank you.
Thank you for the heads up on the July meeting. We appreciate the fact that you're here at all. For those of us that have been on this commission for a while, having the recorder here is a luxury that we haven't enjoyed in the past. We appreciate it very much, and we hope you continue to support us in that regard, if nothing else than to make sure that we have accurate information as far as your side of the elections operation is concerned. Commissioner Hurley.
You mentioned the request for a 2-week notice on agenda items. I assume that's a request and not a hard deadline. That's OML allows much later submittals. So I'm assuming your 2 weeks is for convenience for them, but not a hard deadline.
It's not a hard deadline.
Thank you. I'll try, I promise. I'll try, I promise.
1 week was a hard deadline, and Commissioner White's request for the resolution on the law seemed worth violating a hard deadline for. I think it was a very important issue, well discussed, and some concerns that are very real. Anything else? This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.